Who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people. That was George Mason in 1788. But today, that definition has been twisted, ignored, and almost completely forgotten. Talk about militia, and most people will look at you like some kind of lunatic, fringe nutjob. But to the founders and old revolutionaries, a militia, a well-armed and trained general population, was absolutely essential to the security and liberty of a free republic. So on this episode, we'll talk about what that means, plus the Anti-Federalist warnings about congressional power over the militia and how they absolutely called it. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Friday, August 15th, 2025. And this story starts out with the principle that most Americans have forgotten, and most Americans were never even taught about this. The choice between a citizen militia and a permanent, professional, standing army. General Henry Knox, President George Washington's Secretary of War, he understood what was at stake. He said an energetic national militia is to be regarded as the capital security of a free republic, and not a standing army forming a distinct class in the community. And this was a widely held view. It was highly common, and that's because almost the entire founding generation, maybe setting aside people like Hamilton and Wilson and a few others, they viewed standing armies, especially large, permanent standing armies, as one of the greatest dangers to liberty, if not the greatest danger to liberty to some of them. And here's a great example of this view from the great Revolutionary War hero, Dr. Joseph Warren, in 1775. And he was a student of history, like so many at the time as well. It is further certain, he said, from a consideration of the nature of mankind, understanding human nature, as well as from constant experience, understanding history, that standing armies always endanger the liberty of the subject. Not sometimes, not once in a while, not even most of the time, and definitely not just those dudes over there, but always. And if you fast forward to the ratification debates over the Constitution, a Democratic Federalist in October 1787, I think it may have been Samuel Bryan in Pennsylvania. We really don't know for sure. Well, he looked to history to rank standing armies as potentially the greatest evil to everything. He said the experience of past ages and the result of the enquiries of the best and most celebrated patriots have taught us to dread a standing army above all earthly evils. And Tench Coxe, the founding father, who told us that the average person should be bearing military-grade weapons, one of the prominent and most important defenders of the natural right to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment, and the like from the founding generation. He explained how this plays out through history, how it plays out in practice. He said there is a wide difference between the troops of a commonwealth as ours, a militia, founded on equal and unalterable principles, and those of a regal government, where ambition and oppression are the profession of the king. In the first case, he wrote, a military officer is the occasional servant of the people employed for their defense. I mean, that's a big thing right there. You're not a full-time military person. You're literally just working for the people and in defense. In the second, in the regal government, he is the ever-ready instrument, not a servant. He's a tool, an instrument to execute the schemes of conquest or oppression with which the mind of his royal master may be disturbed. And James Madison, the father of the Constitution, he understood this well. Having an armed, trained, and disciplined citizen militia is, of course, how you prevent a scenario where the people are living in fear and literally begging for the government to be all armed up to somehow protect them. Because eventually, that protection is going to turn into control. They're going to use that power against them. And Madison didn't hold back on this at all. He said, as the greatest danger to liberty is from large standing armies, it is best to prevent them by an effectual provision for a good militia. And Tench Coxe put these principles together as one. For example, first of all, the militia is basically all of the people. And two, in a free society, it's the people themselves who are the first line of defense for themselves, not government. He said the militia, who are in fact the effective part of the people at large, will render many troops quite unnecessary. And he continued, he said they will form a powerful check upon the regular troops. How is that? Well, if you don't need to have a large standing army because you have a powerful population, armed, trained, disciplined to handle the defense of themselves and their country and their states, well, then the regular troops, even if you have them, they're going to be small in number. And he said, for our detached situation will seldom give occasion to raise an army, though a few scattered companies may often be necessary. So moving to the Constitution itself, the word militia, if I'm counting properly, I went to government-run school, so if I fail on this, I'm going to blame them. The word militia, I believe it appears 6 times throughout the Constitution and its amendments. Here in Article 2, Section 2, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 explains when they can be called into the service of the United States. Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. And then in Clause 16, Congress shall have the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them, literally it says, well, if they decide to govern part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Then we have the Bill of Rights, which is also part of the Constitution, of course, amendments to the Constitution. Here's Amendment number 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. And then, of course, the famous one that we've all at least heard, the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. During the ratification debates over the Constitution 1787 to 1789-ish, there was actually pretty significant opposition to the federal power over the militia, heavily so in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16. And it really started out with a foundational principle. That is, the great mass of the people themselves needed to be armed if they wanted to be free. And that's how Federal Farmer put it in his 18th essay. To preserve liberty, he wrote, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. In Virginia, Patrick Henry drove this point home. It wasn't just about some people, a select group of people being armed. It was about everybody. He said the great object is that every man be armed. Now, the opponents consistently warned that this congressional power to arm the militia would only be used for a narrow part of the population. They were concerned, like, okay, we've delegated this power to Congress in this document. How are they going to kind of work with this? And Alexander Hamilton actually didn't want the entire body of the people to be armed. He was totally on the other end of the spectrum. And in Federalist number 29, He talked about this and described it as a select corps. Others called it a select militia. He said, by a curious refinement upon the spirit of Republican jealousy, we are even taught to apprehend danger from the militia itself in the hands of the federal government. It is observed, he wrote, that select corps may be formed, composed of the young and ardent, who may be rendered subservient to the views of arbitrary power. And Hamilton took it even further. He made the case that it was a dumb, a bad, a dangerous idea to try to arm and train everybody. He said, no, let's not do that. He said, the project of disciplining all the militia of the United States is as futile as it would be injurious if it were capable of being carried into execution. He continued, to oblige the great body of the yeomanry and of the other classes of the citizens to be under arms for the purpose of going through military exercises and evolutions, as often as might be necessary to acquire the degree of perfection which would entitle them to the character of a well-regulated militia, would be a real grievance to the people and a serious public inconvenience and loss. But the Anti-Federalist side, they were not buying this kind of argument. They warned that this power, especially as Hamilton was describing it, he was not alone on this, would lead to a select militia becoming, in essence, a standing army, and then the rest of the people would be disarmed over time. And here's John Smiley, for example, such a great name. In the Pennsylvania Ratifying Convention, he started out by saying, I object to the power of Congress over the militia and to keep a standing army. And he explained why. He said, Congress may give us a select militia. They may do this. This was before Hamilton said, well, absolutely, and this is awesome. Congress may give us a select militia, which will, in fact, be a standing army. Or Congress, afraid of a general militia, may say there shall be no militia at all. Starting to sound a little familiar there. When a select militia is formed, he said, the people in general may be disarmed. And that's the same kind of argument we got from George Mason in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He said the militia may be here destroyed by that method which has been practiced in other parts of the world before. Again, a student of history, George Mason certainly knew his stuff. He said that is by rendering them useless, by disarming them. If the government is totally armed up, the people won't feel a need to be armed or trained or disciplined. They won't, they'll say, well, government's got this and I trust them. I mean, even if they don't, you create negative or bad habits in regards to self-defense of yourself, your family, your home, your neighborhood, your state, your country, your republic, and that renders them useless. He said, under various pretenses, Congress may neglect to provide for arming and disciplining the militia, and the state governments cannot do it, for Congress has an exclusive right to arm them. But Mason actually went a little further. He saw something that was possibly even more sinister. What if this wasn't accidental neglect, but part of the whole plan of people in power? He said, should the national government wish to render the militia useless, they may neglect them and let them perish in order to have a pretense of establishing a standing army. And it's very likely, even if he hadn't read Federalist 29 at that point, but let's say he was communicating with people in New York like John Lamb and others, but even he hadn't, the Hamiltonian vision, the Federalist side, was basically making the case that, well, there was no way to know how Congress might use this power because there was nothing that said that they had to make sure that the whole body of the people would be armed. Instead, Hamilton made it clear already, as we heard, that that would be a bad idea. And then he said this, what plan for the regulation of the militia may be pursued by the national government is impossible to be foreseen. And that's exactly what anti-federalists like George Mason were concerned about. And here's a line from him that I think is relatively famous. I hear it from people pretty often, but they forget the caveat, or they've never read the caveat that comes after it. First of all, I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. And here's the caveat and how he obviously understood that Hamiltonian position. He said, but I cannot say who will be the militia of the future day. How is Congress going to use this power? Right now, it's the whole people. And the only thing that could change from that is it could be less than the whole people. He said, if that paper on the table gets no alteration, that is, the Constitution, if it is not amended, the militia of the future day may not consist of all classes, high and low, and rich and poor, but may be confined to the lower and middle classes of the people, granting exclusion to the higher classes of the people. Remember that one, because Mason really made a prediction there. He said, if we should ever see that day, the most ignominious punishments and heavy fines may be expected. And this great concern about Congress not just neglecting to arm and train the whole body of the people, but possibly the next step as well, which was doing it on purpose in order to establish a permanent standing army, or going further and disarming everyone but a select militia. It's a big part of what actually led to us getting the Second Amendment. A number of states, when they ratified the Constitution, they included a set of recommended amendments that James Madison absolutely drew upon when he introduced them in the first Congress. Here, for example, from the Virginia ratification of the Constitution in June of 1788, that the people have a right to keep and bear arms, that a well-regulated militia, composed of the body of the people trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Other states like New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island had very similar, if not verbatim, recommended amendments when they ratified. And Thomas Jefferson, some years later, he recalled how, well, he was in France, and once he saw the Constitution, he was writing back and forth with James Madison about this. And he said, on receiving it, I wrote strongly to Mr. Madison, urging the want of provision for a number of things. He said, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, trial by jury, habeas corpus, the substitution of militia for a standing army. That's Jefferson pressing Madison to introduce something that eventually became the Second Amendment. And of course, an express reservation to the states of all rights, not specifically granted to the Union. That ended up being the 9th and 10th. Now remember those predictions, those warnings that we got from George Mason about how Congress, well, if they ever decided to only just focus on a select militia, we'd have real bad problems. Well, if you fast forward a little over a century to 1903, not 1913, which was a terrible year, but 03 was pretty bad as well, Congress passed the Militia Act of 1903, what a lot of people today call the Dick Act. And this formally did what George Mason warned would be terrible to do. They divided the militia into distinct classes. Here from Section 1, literally the first thing they pass, the militia shall consist of every able-bodied male citizen of the respective states, territories, and the District of Columbia, and every able-bodied male of foreign birth who has declared his intention to become a citizen, who is more than 18 and less than 45 years of age. So they're already narrowing it down from the whole body of the people able to possess and be trained in arms to 18 to 45-year-old males. But wait, there's even more. They said it shall be divided into two classes. Intentionally, the organized militia to be known as the National Guard of the state, territory, or District of Columbia, and the remainder to be known as the Reserve Militia. So that was Congress providing for organizing, arming, and disciplining that part of the militia that they were thinking, well, maybe we'll have to call them into service. And so now they're saying we're just going to have one class, organized militia, that we're saying we're going to pay to organize or we're going to take care of, and the rest is the Reserve Militia. In other words, the rest of the whole body of the people. And then, of course, they weren't even done there. And just to ensure that it would be even more like the permanent standing army that the founding generation absolutely despised, politicians were specifically made exempt. Like, they don't have to have any skin in the game. They just, send people off to war and rake it in, I guess. The Vice President of the United States, the officers, judicial and executive, of the government of the United States, the members and officers of each House of Congress shall be exempted from militia duty without regard to age. And if that does not sound familiar to George Mason's warning, I'm not sure what will, but the militia was and always will be part of the whole body of the people. But just like the Anti-Federalists warned us over and over and over, giving Congress the power to decide who they would organize, arm, and discipline as just part of the militia, as a distinct class in the militia, we'd get a 1-2 punch that we're living under to this very day. First of all, the select militia being basically treated as part of the permanent standing army. And then 2, which is far more dangerous, tens of millions of people who are not armed today. Like virtually everything else that's foundational to our Constitution, that's essential to our security and our liberty, the government-run and government-approved so-called education system never teaches us any of this stuff. And that's a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day. We're going to be 20 years this next year in 2026, day in and day out, year in and year out. We work so hard to reach and teach more and more people about these essential foundational principles, and nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. I'd be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us today. Thank you so much for that. And if you don't want to become a member but still want to help us out, that's super awesome. Whatever works best for you works great for me. And if you're already a member, thank you. And you want to pitch in a little additional, no pressure. I just want to make sure you know how you can do that. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Of course, we take fiat electronically. You can send us mail. We'll take real money like gold backs. Whatever, again, works best for you is awesome for us, and I'm very grateful for your support. There's also a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word. Whatever you can do to interact with the various platforms, audio and video, hitting the like button, subscribe, notifications, reviews on the podcast platforms, watch time percentage on the video platforms like YouTube, for example. If it's a 10-minute video and you watch it for 40 minutes, that's 400%. Which is way better than 50% if you only watch 5 minutes. And if you're only watching 5 minutes, I'm not doing a good job. So the fact that you're still here, I'm so grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here and there. But more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.